There's a quiet power in the man who sleeps alone. No performance, no apology, no morning tension woven into the sheets. Just clarity. He pours his coffee, stares out the window, and knows this one thing: he doesn't belong to anyone's chaos. And for that, he pays a price. But the reward? It's unlike anything people trapped in emotional entanglement can imagine. See, people whisper when a man stays single too long. They call it fear, immaturity, failure. They assume he's stuck, that he can't commit, that something must be wrong. What they never consider is that maybe something is right. Maybe, over time, solitude sharpens the edge. Maybe, instead of falling behind, he's forging ahead, building something no one sees until it's unshakable. That's what we're exploring today. Not loneliness, not withdrawal, but the kind of solitude that transforms, the kind that rewires, the kind that reclaims everything that was once handed over too easily. Attention, energy, peace, control. If this is already speaking to something inside you, like, share and subscribe to Victory Stoic. This isn't self-help fluff. This is the hard, brutal truth about building a mind and a life that no longer needs external validation to feel alive. And if you're here with us, comment 1 below if this subject hits home. If not, comment 0. We still want to know. Your feedback shapes this channel. We're entering a new phase here at Victory Stoic. One where we're not just drawing from the ancient fire of Stoicism, but blending it with modern thinkers like Jordan Peterson, Viktor Frankl, Carl Jung, voices that challenge, sharpen, and disrupt the noise. We're not giving you escape, we're giving you architecture, brick by brick, for a self that can stand through any storm. And we want your story. Drop a comment. What does solitude mean to you? When did you first realize being alone didn't mean being lost? What did you build when no one was watching? That story could be what someone else desperately needs to hear. Now, back to the man in the silence. He's not perfect. He's not above need, but he's done making his emotional survival someone else's responsibility. He's done giving away his structure for the illusion of companionship. And the longer he walks alone, the more dangerous he becomes. Not in rage, but in resolve. Because every day spent in solitude is another day building the muscles of discernment, clarity, and self-respect. He no longer fears rejection because he's no longer negotiating his worth. He doesn't chase validation, he's already earned it from himself. And that's a foundation narcissists can't manipulate, that flaky lovers can't shake, and that society can't shame. In the content that follows, we'll break down exactly why this happens, how it reshapes a person, and what shifts inside someone who stops looking outward for peace and starts building it from within. Let's begin. Number 1. You no longer rely on validation to feel valuable. He doesn't check his phone first thing in the morning to see if anyone messaged. There's no dopamine hit waiting in unread texts, no emotional scorecard based on someone else's response time. Instead, he sits quietly, makes his coffee, and gets on with his life, not out of pride, but because he's no longer addicted to being seen. That kind of transformation doesn't happen overnight. It happens slowly, painfully, over time, when solitude stops feeling like punishment and starts revealing its power. There's a moment every man faces when he chooses to walk alone. Not because he has no options, but because none of the options align with his soul. And in that space, something rare occurs. The dependency on external validation begins to crack. The need to be liked, admired, desired, it doesn't vanish, but it loses its grip. What replaces it isn't arrogance, it's clarity. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If you live to please the crowd, you've already died." Most people don't understand that line until they've spent months, even years, chasing the eyes of others, only to feel more hollow after every applause. Because the moment your sense of worth is tied to another's attention, you're no longer free, you're leased. Meet Daniel. He's 43, lives in Boston, owns a small carpentry business. A few years ago, after a long breakup, he spent months bouncing from one casual relationship to another. Each one started the same, a burst of connection, the thrill of novelty, the hope that this time it would feel whole. But each ended with the same silent question echoing in his head. Why do I still feel unseen, even when someone is lying next to me? The answer came not from a therapist or a podcast, but one night on his own after a long day, when he looked around his empty apartment and realized for the first time, no one's coming to affirm me, no one's coming to say, I matter. so I better start believing it myself. Or, this never ends. That was the shift. Not a grand declaration, not a breakdown, just quiet disgust with the cycle, and a decision to step out of it. From that moment, Daniel stopped checking social media metrics. He stopped initiating conversations that didn't energize him. He started building furniture late at night, not to impress, but because it made him feel grounded. Slowly, his nervous system adjusted, his posture changed, and the urge to prove something to someone else started to dissolve. There's neuroscience behind this. A 2019 study in Nature Neuroscience found that social reward triggers the same neural pathways as addictive substances. In other words, being liked literally lights up the brain. But here's the darker side. When we don't receive that hit, we can experience emotional withdrawal, which is why solitude can feel like detox. Your system has to recalibrate without constant feedback from others to feel okay. This is where Stoicism becomes not just helpful, but necessary. Epictetus warned, "It's not what others say about you that hurts, it's that you believe them." That's the battlefield, not the external world, but your own mind's reaction to it. And the only way to win that battle is to reclaim the throne of your own opinion. So what happens when a man no longer needs praise to feel worthy? He stops over-explaining. He stops over-giving. He stops showing up in ways that betray his integrity just to avoid disapproval. And that is a terrifying shift. For everyone who once relied on his insecurity to keep him compliant, people sense it. When your self-worth stops being negotiable, you become unpredictable. You stop chasing affection. You stop responding to passive aggression. You become quiet, not out of avoidance, but out of detachment. There's nothing to defend anymore. No mask to polish. You've already accepted who you are, flaws and all, and that makes you very hard to manipulate. Here's a simple, practical step. For the next 7 days, do one thing each day that's completely for yourself, without posting about it, without telling anyone, without expecting praise. Go on a walk without your phone. Cook a full meal for yourself with care. Fix something broken. Write something no one else will read. At first, it may feel pointless, but what you're doing is rebuilding your identity from the inside out. There's a strange kind of peace that comes when you realize no one clapping is not the same as no one caring. The world doesn't need to cheer for you to matter. And ironically, the more rooted you become in that truth, the more respect you start to receive. Not because you demanded it, but because people can sense when you've stopped begging for it. Back to Daniel. A year after that night in his apartment, he wasn't in a relationship. He didn't have a massive online following. But he walked differently. He laughed with his chest. He spoke less. But when he did, people listened. He said, "It's strange. I used to try so hard to be seen. Now that I've stopped, I've never felt more visible." That's the paradox. Validation chases the man who no longer needs it. Because when your worth becomes internal, everything external becomes optional. Attention is nice. Praise feels good, love is welcome, but none of it defines you. And when nothing defines you but your own principles, you become immovable. Not rigid, resolute, not closed, self-contained. And to the people who once tried to shape you, control you, define you, you become something they can't touch. Because they didn't build you, so they can't break you. That's not arrogance, that's alignment, that's Stoicism. Number 2, the mind clears when you stop feeding on drama. Imagine your mind like a glass lake at dawn, still, undisturbed, reflecting only what's real. Now picture what happens when someone throws a stone into it every 5 minutes. Ripples, distortion, chaos. That's what petty conflict does to your thinking. Every small argument, every passive-aggressive comment, every "we need to talk" message that leads nowhere, it keeps your mental waters stirred. And if you live in that long enough, you start thinking murky water is normal. But here's the shift. When you choose solitude long enough, the ripples stop. You stop chasing resolution in battles that shouldn't have been fought in the first place. You stop explaining yourself to people who don't even listen. You stop trying to fix tension that doesn't belong to you. And slowly, you remember what peace actually feels like. This was the case for Aaron, 38, a freelance designer from Seattle. For years, his relationships followed the same pattern. Intense connection, early control, then a steady slide into petty emotional drama. One partner would turn every disagreement into a personal attack. Another demanded constant emotional check-ins. Even when things were fine, there was always an edge, a low buzz of tension in the air. Aaron didn't think of it as dysfunction. He thought of it as passion, as just part of being close to someone, until the pattern broke. After a particularly draining breakup, Aaron decided to be single, for real. Not in between, not browsing, just alone. At first, the silence felt like withdrawal. No text arguments, no dramatic makeups, just space. But over time, his mornings changed. His attention span returned. He found himself reading more, reacting less, thinking deeper. He said, "I didn't realize how much noise I had normalized." That's what this number is about. What happens to a mind when you stop letting it be a battleground for emotional clutter? Stoic philosopher Musonius Rufus said, "We must practice simplicity, not only in possessions, but in emotions." That's not detachment. That's discipline. It means learning to conserve your energy like it matters, because it does. Every moment spent untangling someone else's mood is a moment stolen from your own clarity. Psychology confirms this. A 2017 study published in Frontiers in Human Neuroscience found that prolonged exposure to low-level interpersonal stress impairs the prefrontal cortex, specifically your ability to reason, focus, and regulate emotions. In short, petty drama makes you dumber. It literally lowers your capacity for critical thinking. You're not just emotionally exhausted, you're cognitively impaired. Jordan Peterson speaks to this in his emphasis on cleaning your room. It's not just a metaphor for tidying your environment, it's a demand to remove unnecessary chaos so you can think clearly. He says order is the precondition for adventure. Meaning, without inner and outer order, your life becomes reaction, not action. Here's how you break the cycle. Stop feeding it. Set a 7-day drama fast. No debating online, no revisiting old arguments, no overanalyzing subtext in text messages. When something tries to provoke you, say less. Or say nothing. Let silence be your filter. If someone demands a reaction, ask yourself, if I don't respond, does the problem still exist, or was I the fuel all along? And here's the hidden truth. Drama isn't always from others. Sometimes it's internal. It's the story you keep replaying, the grievance you won't release, the identity you've built around being wounded. But Stoicism doesn't excuse that. It calls it out. Epictetus said, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." You have to stop rehearsing the pain if you want peace to take root. Back to Aaron. After a year of chosen solitude, he didn't just feel calmer, he made better decisions. He grew his client base. He started hiking every Sunday. He said, "When I removed the noise, I could finally hear what my own mind was saying." And when he eventually did date again, he walked away from anyone who brought unnecessary tension. Not with anger, just with clarity. He said, "If peace is what I built, I won't hand it away cheaply." That's what happens when the drama stops being your diet. You realize how poisoned you were, and you start craving silence the way you once craved stimulation. So if you're still tangled in someone else's chaos, if your mind is buzzing with conversations that drain you, arguments that go nowhere, or relationships that feel like war zones, step back. Not out of fear, but out of mastery. Because your attention is sacred. And your peace is not a luxury, it's a responsibility. This is the part where you stop being a participant in every conflict you're invited to, where you stop proving, defending, explaining, and instead, start observing, redirecting, and building. Not just boundaries, but bandwidth. That's not weakness, that's wisdom. Number 3, grateful for the silence. The sound addicts will never understand. There's a type of silence that doesn't haunt you, it heals you. But you only learn to appreciate it once the noise you once clung to finally dies down. For most people, silence is terrifying, not because it's empty, but because it reflects. It forces you to hear your own voice, your real thoughts, your unmet truths. And in a world addicted to distraction, to scrolling, to stimulation, that's more terrifying than chaos itself. For the dependent, silence is exile. For the grounded, it's sanctuary. Stoic philosopher Cleanthes wrote, "Let silence be your general rule, say only what is necessary." But that's not just a guide for speech, it's a way of living. Because when you finally stop filling the space with people, noise, validation, or drama, you start realizing the most precious clarity often shows up in stillness. This lesson found Logan, 46, a project engineer from Denver, 2 years after his divorce. For months, he couldn't stand being alone. He'd leave the TV on just to feel less isolated. He kept casual dates on rotation just to fill the silence. His house was never still. Something always had to be happening, or else the emptiness crept in. But what he didn't know back then was that the emptiness he feared wasn't from being alone. It was from being disconnected from himself. One weekend, after plans fell through and distractions failed to entertain, Logan sat on his back porch and just listened. No phone, no Netflix, just air, wind, breath. And something strange happened. Nothing. But it wasn't dead. It was clean, uncluttered, undemanding. For the first time in years, he felt the noise stop, not outside, but inside. And in that moment, he realized, this isn't loneliness. This is space. And space is where rebuilding begins. Jordan Peterson often warns about avoiding silence. He says, you can't find yourself until you're alone with yourself. And that's why people keep running. His point is simple. The things you fear in silence are the very things you need to face to grow. And the people most terrified of stillness are often the ones most controlled by it. It's like this. Imagine your mind is a room, and all your life you've filled it with furniture that belongs to other people, expectations, conversations, conflicts, noise. Then one day you empty the room. At first it feels barren, then it feels open, and finally it becomes yours. That's what silence gives you, ownership. Here's a tip. Start with 10 minutes a day of deliberate quiet. No phone, no screen, just sit. Let your mind panic. Let the noise rise. Then watch it pass. Like a storm moving across the sky, it will eventually break. What comes after is not boredom. It's clarity. Science backs this up. A 2013 study from Brain Structure and Function found that periods of silence stimulated the growth of new brain cells in the hippocampus, the area responsible for learning, memory, and emotional regulation. In other words, silence literally repairs the mind. But most people never make it that far, because silence doesn't flatter. It doesn't distract, it doesn't applaud. It confronts, it's the mirror you can't avoid. And the ones who need noise to survive? They're not living, they're escaping. Logan used to think silence was punishment. Now it's his refuge. He starts every morning in quiet, no notifications, no headlines, just breath and presence. He told a friend once, noise used to feel like home. Now it feels like intrusion. That's when you know the shift is real. Not when you tolerate silence, but when you protect it. So what happens when you embrace silence instead of running from it? You stop filling your calendar with people who drain you. You stop arguing to be understood. You stop performing peace and start experiencing it. The chatter dies down. The need to constantly express, defend, justify, it dissolves. You begin to hear a new voice. Yours. Unfiltered, undistracted, unowned. And the people still chasing noise? They won't understand. They'll call you distant, aloof, detached. But that's because they only feel alive in reaction. They only feel worthy when reflected. They can't sit still because stillness exposes what they've never faced. But you've built a different foundation, one that doesn't need noise to feel whole. So if you're in that early phase, where the silence still feels cold, stay in it, let it scare you, let it strip you, and then let it show you what's been waiting underneath the noise all along. Your mind, unbent. Your thoughts, unclaimed. Your strength, finally audible. Number 4, the man who chose himself and became a myth. They whisper about at reunions. He wasn't cursed, he wasn't heartbroken, he wasn't even bitter. He simply looked around one day at the circus of modern dating. The half-read texts, the flirty trauma dumps, the where's this going conversations over overpriced tapas, and said, no thanks. Then he went home, made a steak, opened a book, lifted heavy things, slept like a god, and woke up with a plan. Not a grudge, not a need, a plan. That was the last most people saw of him. Of course they talked, they always do. He must be lonely. He's probably afraid of intimacy. You know, his last girlfriend was kind of intense. But deep down, they knew something else, something harder to admit. That he had chosen a path most people are too distracted to even consider. Total devotion to personal growth. Not the Instagram kind. Not the read 10 pages a day while sipping mushroom tea kind. Real, surgical, lonely, monk-like development. The kind that requires silence, systems, sweat, and saying no to everything that doesn't align. Including, often, other people. Jordan Peterson put it like this. You should be better today than you were yesterday. Not better than someone else is today. Simple, brutal, unavoidable, and completely incompatible with spending 3 hours a night trying to decode a passive-aggressive message that ends in lol. When a man removes himself from the emotional colosseum, where validation is bartered, jealousy is currency, and everyone's competing to appear unaffected, something terrifying happens. He begins to focus. Focus without friction. Focus that sharpens. He no longer spends mental calories rehearsing arguments, replaying misunderstandings, or deciphering tone. He gets up, works, lifts, reads, builds, reflects, and improves, while the rest of the world argues in the comment section of their lives. Meet Jason. 45, owns a small but thriving architecture firm in Arizona. Used to date often, tried the apps, tried the just be open phase. It was always the same, a rush of connection followed by slow emotional erosion, as his energy was siphoned off by drama, ambiguity, and adult humans with the self-awareness of damp toast. One day, mid-conversation with someone he barely knew, he had a thought so sharp it burned. I don't have time for this. Not out of anger. Just clarity. The same way you'd look at a pop-up ad and close it with outrage, because you know it's not part of the work you came here to do. So Jason bowed out. Not with resentment, with ruthless efficiency. He poured everything back into his business, his body, his skills, and perhaps most importantly, his mornings. He stopped explaining his solitude, stopped apologizing for his peace, and 1 year later, his firm doubled revenue. His back squat increased by 40 pounds, his stress levels dropped, and his phone, blessedly, was silent, because he wasn't a ghost. He was a builder, not of illusions, of reality. And here's the thing about focus, it compounds. It's not dramatic at first, there's no applause. But day after day, the man who isn't bleeding out into someone else's emotional mess builds something no one else can see, until it's undeniable. Stoicism teaches this through action, not sentiment. Seneca wrote, "It is not that life is short, but that we waste much of it. Nothing wastes more of it than performative attachment. Chasing intimacy before integrity. Trying to save people who don't want saving. Trying to be understood by those addicted to misinterpretation." Now let's get clinical. A 2021 study published in Journal of Vocational Behavior found that individuals who reported longer periods of voluntary solitude, not loneliness, but chosen solitude, showed significant gains in career focus, long-term goal achievement, and emotional resilience. Translation: being alone, on purpose, makes you better. Sharper, stronger, less reactive, more aligned. Why? Because no one is pulling your attention out of you like a loose thread on a sweater. Here's a tip. Block 1 full day a week where no one gets access to your emotional energy unless they've earned it. No replies to vague texts, no social check-ins, no just catching up calls. Fill it with you, training, learning, creating, or resting with intention. Watch what happens to your momentum when your bandwidth isn't held hostage. There's a myth that growth is lonely. But the truth is, chaotic people are far lonelier than the man who builds in peace. They have a crowd. Yes, but no structure. A feed full of likes, but a schedule full of nothing. No direction. Just dopamine hits and existential anxiety wrapped in the illusion of connection. Meanwhile, Jason, silent, focused, unread by many, became what myths are made of. At his high school reunion, he showed up late, left early, and somehow managed to be the only one whose life looked like it made sense. No entourage, no performative spouse, just presence, posture, power. People whispered again, he's changed. But not in a tragic way. In the way that makes people question their own choices. The kind of change that can't be bought or borrowed. It must be earned, alone. So if you're still unsure, if you still think being single long-term means something's off, consider this. Maybe what's off is a world that thinks a distracted man is more functional than a focused one. Maybe being chosen by yourself is more powerful than being tolerated by someone else. And maybe, just maybe, your solitude isn't a pause in the story. Maybe it's the beginning of a legend. Number 5. Love is not a lifeline. It's a deliberate choice, made by the whole, not the hollow. There comes a moment, quiet, unannounced, when you sit across from someone and realize you're no longer trying to be chosen. You're observing, listening, not to win their affection, but to see if your peace can remain intact in their presence. That moment marks a shift, not just in how you love, but in why. Because real love, the kind that lasts, builds, and transcends, doesn't come from hunger. It's born of fullness. And that kind of love only lives in those who have spent enough time alone to learn that solitude was never the enemy. It was the teacher. For most people, love begins with a lack. A gnawing sense that something's missing, a shadow cast by their own fear of being alone. And into that shadow, they throw anyone who smiles at the right time. That's not love. That's emotional outsourcing, a transaction dressed up as destiny. But when a person chooses to be single long enough, deliberately, consciously, brutally, the illusion of love as cure begins to rot. What grows in its place is something rarer: discernment. The recognition that love is not an emergency, but a construction project, one you should never begin until your own foundation is solid. This truth revealed itself to Michael, 52, a chiropractor in San Diego. After 2 failed marriages and a lifetime of codependence masked as commitment, he decided to stop dating. No half steps, no apps, no just coffee. The silence was jarring. He said the hardest part wasn't the absence of intimacy, it was facing the fact that he'd never actually been alone. Not in spirit. Not in mind, not in bed, even when no one was beside him. But after a year of solitude, something shifted. He didn't miss the fireworks. He missed nothing. That's when he knew he was ready. Not to be in love, but to choose love, should it come. Jordan Peterson notes, a relationship should be between 2 people walking side by side, not leaning on each other to stand up. He's not condemning closeness. He's identifying a disease of modern love, mutual weakness mistaken for intimacy. When neither person is whole, the relationship becomes a crutch, not a collaboration. And when one starts to heal, the other feels abandoned, not because they were truly left behind, but because the balance of power shifted away from dependency. The Stoics, especially Hierocles, spoke of circles of concern. At the center is the self, then family, then friends, then the world. But the order matters. You cannot expand outward in strength until you are centered inward with integrity. Loving someone from a fractured self is like pouring from a cracked jar. The more you give, the less you hold. And eventually you resent the one you once adored. Here's a test. If love requires you to abandon your rituals, dilute your truth, or shrink your voice, it's not a choice, it's survival. And survival, no matter how beautiful it looks on Instagram, will never be sacred. There's a deeper point here. We've been trained by movies, songs, culture to see love as salvation, to believe that being chosen means we're finally safe. But here's the real twist. If you haven't saved yourself first, being chosen is a trap. Because you'll cling to it, not cherish it. You'll mold yourself to fit it, not test whether it fits you. And worst of all, you'll stay even when it turns to poison, because your worth was never rooted in your own soil to begin with. That's why people who've done the work, who've sat in the silence, sharpened their mind, lifted their body, and cleaned their mental house, don't chase love. They scan for alignment. They know their peace is not negotiable. They don't enter relationships because they need warmth. They enter them because they've become a furnace. Michael said something unforgettable when I asked what changed for him after years of solitude. He said, "I don't need a woman to complete me. I need someone whose presence doesn't require me to abandon the man I've become." That's not cynicism. That's sacred maturity. Psychologically, this tracks. A 2020 meta-analysis from the Journal of Personality found that individuals who score high in self-differentiation, meaning the ability to maintain identity and boundaries within emotional relationships, report higher relationship satisfaction, lower conflict, and significantly less emotional exhaustion. Translation: the more complete you are going in, the less chaos you create once inside. Here's a tip, simple but sharp. Write down 5 things you refuse to give up about yourself, not out of ego, but principle. If a relationship required you to sacrifice them, would you hesitate? If so, you're still confusing connection with salvation. Burn the list. Rewrite it. Build the version of yourself who would never hand that list over, even for a beautiful smile and the promise of forever. Back to Michael. Eventually, he did meet someone. Not on an app, not at a bar, at a seminar on neuroplasticity. She asked him a question about the speaker. He answered without flirting. She responded with equal presence. There was no rush, no performance, just a quiet recognition. This person isn't here to fill me. They're here to build beside me. They've done their own work, they bring their own peace, and they aren't afraid of mine. They now live together. No wedding hashtags, no photos to prove it. Just a shared life with shared values, and a locked door between their relationship and the chaos outside. Because that's the ultimate reward for choosing solitude before love. When you finally invite someone in, it's not because you're starving. It's because your table is already full, and you simply chose to make room for one more seat. You didn't settle. You didn't chase. You didn't break yourself to be held. You were already whole. And the love that found you didn't save you. It saluted you. And that's the kind of love you never lose, because it wasn't built from absence. It was built from overflow, from enough, from choice. And choice, my friend, is where freedom begins, and where every great love should too. Conclusion: you were never missing a half. You were always building a whole. They told you love would complete you. They forgot to mention it might also erase you. They said finding someone would make everything make sense, but they never said what happens when you forget your name in the process. They told you to seek connection, to open your heart, to just let it happen. But they never warned you how easy it is to mistake addiction for affection when you're starving for meaning. This story, yours, mine, all of ours, has been long. And if you've stayed with us this far, it means you're not afraid of hearing what most avoid. That solitude isn't failure, it's foundation. That stillness isn't emptiness, it's structure. That being alone, when chosen with clarity, becomes the most dangerous form of strength, because it makes you unbuyable. So when you do love, it won't be from need. It will be from sovereignty. And that makes all the difference. We're ending here, for now. But this isn't over. There's more to uncover in part 2, where we'll go even deeper into the Stoic roots of true connection, the myths of romantic fulfillment, and how modern psychology continues to validate what the ancients already knew. You do not become whole by being held. You become whole by standing, then choosing who you stand beside. If this video spoke to something real inside you, like, share, and subscribe to Victory Stoic. This is where we build minds that can't be manipulated, lives that don't collapse under pressure, and relationships that begin from strength, not survival. Comment 1 below if this message hit home. Comment 0 if it didn't resonate. Your feedback is just as valuable. And if you're ready, share your story in the comments. The moment you realized you were enough, the day you stopped chasing and started choosing. The silence that rebuilt you. Your voice might be exactly what someone else needs to hear tonight. Thank you for listening, for thinking, for standing still with us in a world that won't shut up. See you in part 2. Until then, choose yourself first. Not because you're all you've got, but because you're the only one you'll never lose.